Aaron, I know maybe a lot of people watching this video don't know who you are, maybe within like the video game development realm.
I'm nobody.
You're nobody, but you're somebody to me.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
good.
You know, honestly, before I started Game Informer, I was a huge fan of Destructoid. I listened to like tons of Podtoids, and that was Destructoid's podcast.
I'm very sorry.
The core connection with Destructoid and Podtoid that is the reason you're sitting here is, I feel like Anthony Burch has a big part in that. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's all about the nepotism here.
Yeah.
That and I introduced him to his wife, and I've been holding that over his head for years and years, and I'm just like, this better pay off. Like every time I see him, I'm just like, this better get me something. It's great that you're happy, but what's in it for me? And it's funny though, because I used to make that joke a lot, and then when I got hired here, he's like, all right, we're square now. That's what you get for introducing me. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't actually mean any of that, but it was, yeah. He and I have been friends for years, and actually, like his wife Ashley Davis, I knew her from met her on LiveJournal. How like horrible is that? LiveJournal like in 1886. So, and Ashley Burch and all of the other folks involved with Hop, they've been friends of mine for years. So it's kind of getting in the door here was. It's his fault.
Obviously, he wouldn't have knocked on your door or whatever you sleep behind or hide behind if he didn't think that you were a good fit for, I think, Battleborn specifically, right?
One would hope, yeah.
Yeah.
We're both really big fans of Team Fortress and that kind of stuff. We're both really picky about battle chatter specifically. And that's something we talk about a lot. The stuff that you consider incidental is where a lot of really cool things can happen and where a lot of really great characterization can happen. And there's going to be a lot of that stuff in Battleborn, but in addition to that, the general storytelling thing. Also, I think it's just that I paid him. That helped. But a lot of money. Obviously, I can't take anything related to how I got hired here seriously, because it was a big deal. Like when he got hired on here, I'm like, that totally makes sense. He's like the right guy for the job for Borderlands. That's got him all over it. And I was working on Gears, and then I bounced around to a couple of other studios, and we always thought about that idea of just like, wouldn't it be cool? We could work together sometime. Yeah, it's gonna be great. And let's hope several people are struck by lightning at Gearbox and open up a couple of heads, but fortunately there was just another game being produced, and that made the opportunity right. I don't know what else to say about it. I owe him quite a lot.
So where was Battleborn at when you came on board then?
It was pretty far along.
Yeah.
There was a lot of really great ideas already down there. The core game loops were all in place. A lot of the characters, the factions, the basic premise upon which all of the Battleborn narrative is founded was already in place, and all of that stuff, that was really intriguing to me. I'm a big space nerd, and I really like the idea. My favorite short story is The Last Question by Isaac Asimov, which is a short story basically about the question of entropy, like what happens when our closed system comes to a point where there's just nothing interesting left going on in the universe. Everything tends towards entropy. And so when they told me it's a story about the last star where the cosmos has gone dark, I clapped like an idiot and made a bunch of squealing noises. That was my first phone interview. It was probably not the most effective strategy, but it seemed like it was right up my alley. It's the sort of big question sci-fi that I tend to gravitate to pretty naturally. It
seems like that's a mix with getting a feel for your sense of humor on podcasts you've been on, plus now hearing that you are also into popular sci-fi, and it seems like you're also interested in the sort of gritty, more Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of looking at what it all means.
I think that's the only time the words gritty and Neil deGrasse Tyson have ever been uttered in the same sentence. But yeah, all that stuff is very near and dear to my heart. I actually didn't discover Cosmos until 4 years ago or something, and that was just catnip to me. It was just ridiculous. That's the stuff that I tend to look for the most in sci-fi, the stuff that I really find myself getting into, is where you can feel a sense of awe for completely grounded reasons, for actual reasons, as opposed to just wow, did you see that, there's this part in the car chase and this thing blew up and all this other, all the things that are great about fiction, and that kind of, where you get that sensation where the hair on the back of your neck stands up, you can get that from just what's actually out there.
Right.
And, what the cosmos is actually about. So that's when I really started getting into that. I haven't passed a math class since 8th grade, and to say nothing of my science back. I'm an English major, so I'm an idiot, and you could say the word equation and I'll probably just get a nosebleed. But so it's definitely the pop science kind of stuff that I'm into, but all of it's just awesome.
I'm really interested in, I caught a whiff of consulting physicists to see about the feasibility of some of these terrible galactic calamities and stuff like that. And what were those conversations like? Were you privy to any of those conversations?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah. Sean Ridden, our executive producer, set us up with an astrophysicist from SMU, and over drinks we talked about space and stuff, which is cool in its own right. Like, that was just a great evening for me in general, and just get to hang out and BS with an astrophysicist for a few hours, and also drink.
They BS pretty well? Is that?
Yeah,
they do.
Surprisingly
well.
That's
cool.
Yeah. There was a lot of it was. Yeah, well, especially once you introduce the drinking, then it was just a lot of like, they defunded NASA, kick them in the hat, whatever. It's just, it just
kick
lots
them in the hat.
Yeah. No. I'm trying not to curse.
So you guys are having drinks and talking about.
Yeah, we were
space
having drinks,
stuff.
talking about space, which was just generally awesome. We were giving a little bit of background into sort of what our at the time, a lot of those core plot details were still sort of forming up, so we were investigating what is the potential scientific feasibility of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And then we quickly learned that, okay, well, we're probably not so much hard sci-fi as we would have liked to have been. But I mean, that is one of the things that I love about our IP, is that we are in this place where these ideas are stretched to their furthest logical conclusions. And there are some really interesting extremes when you look at like cosmology and really interesting scenarios that can emerge out of that. How well that translates to interactive storytelling, I mean, I guess we'll find out, but we're probably not going to be as hard sci-fi as I would have wanted to be, which, the fact is, when you got a guy like Montana and a lot of the other characters that we have, it's probably a foregone conclusion well before I realize it. But we are a bunch of nerds, we're really into that stuff. It'd be really awesome if we could communicate some of that passion to our audience.
It's interesting because you talk about being goofy and having a good sense of humor, and then being into like the actual science behind it and nerding out on that. And like both of those sorts of realms seem to be really represented in what I've seen of Battleborn so far, where it's like the way that John Melke put it was like, it's a funny game, but it's not a joke.
That's something that resonates really well with me. I mean, and I think it's something that resonates with Gearbox in general, is that we can tell a story that has, that is very funny in the telling, but does have high stakes and serious consequences, and characters that are really invested in what they're doing and care whether or not they, live or die or succeed or fail. I mean, and in the case of like the things that I often, like the media and stuff that I often looked at when we were figuring out tone for Battleborn, like The Fifth Element and Futurama and that kind of stuff, where you can have these emotionally resonant moments, but still, laugh even when things are at their most dire. There's something really intoxicating about that to me, just because it's an easy way out for me, because I have some difficulty taking myself seriously consistently throughout, the arc of a story. If I can't, make fun of something as we're moving towards this climactic finish, I'm going to get really uncomfortable and run screaming out of the room. And I think in the case of Battleborn, like, that's something that, I mean, these are characters that have been living, for generations upon generations under this really oppressive notion that the universe is teetering on the over the brink of the end. Like, it's not just, wow, things are going to suck for a while, or, oh man, the story might be over for us. No, the story is over for everybody once it ends. Like, so the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. But like, these are people that have persevered in that scenario for so long. You figure they'd have some means of dealing with it, or that's a reality that is as familiar to them as just a blue sky to us. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. One thing that's really stuck out to me, like, about these characters we're talking about, is all the names for these characters. Like, it's a ton of just crazy different characters. You have like your, I don't want to say generic, but stock Space Marine guy, which is a different word for generic, stock. But
it's slightly more polite.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's kind of like it's kind of the intent without being like a parody. Like Oscar Mike is the name of the character. But like, how much iteration went behind getting to the point where his name was Oscar Mike?
The story is embarrassing because not much. There was a lot of iteration in getting him to a series of names that we ended up not using. And the way that we got to Oscar Mike was, I thought to myself, hey, wouldn't it be funny if, instead of trying to appeal to players that find these characters, familiar and that kind of thing, we make a big joke out of it. And then I pitched Oscar Mike, and then people laughed, and then we did it. That is the creative process, at least insofar as that name was concerned. By thinking about him as like not parody, I try to imagine like that is a character who he believes everything he's saying. He is really into what he's saying. There is there's an honesty in that character that I find really compelling. It pretty much started with the name.
Okay.
So the process thus far has been, typically our characters are given a pretty generic in-engine name, and then we argue for weeks upon end and put about a zillion names up on the whiteboard and try to figure out, what's a fitting name for what the final name will be. And characters have either been like, this character has had a name, like Caldarius, for example. Caldarius had Caldarius since before I got here. And
oh, okay, it was before you got here.
Yeah, that was before we got here, and I'm just like, that sounds cool, stick with it. And every name that I could come up with, nothing seemed to stick quite as well.
Yeah.
Same goes for Montana and a couple of our other characters. But then in the case of like Thorn, for example, that was a long couple of weeks. Yeah, naming stuff is hard. Rarely do I look forward to it. Okay. I rarely find myself thinking, oh my God, I can't wait to name stuff.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about, you and Anthony Burch have similar thoughts on just sort of banter in games, how it can get worn out or old, or especially if people really dig into multiplayer in this game, which seems like it's a high possibility. I love what's in there so far. Like, one of my favorites was just like, you're Montana, who's the big dude who's just constantly getting pelted by fire because he's like one of the biggest objects on the field at this point. And one of the things he just yells is just like, stop. And that was like my favorite one-liner from the entire
That was
thing.
it? Oh, wow.
Yeah, honestly, because it just like was what I was feeling at the time.
All right.
But like that's just like one, where do you stop like making one-liners for these like super unique characters that have all these like interplays off of, they interplay off other characters and stuff?
Usually when my audio leads threaten me with violence.
Okay.
My best answer I can come up with is I don't know. Those unusual pairings of characters, those unusual circumstances where characters will, and across all of our game types, we're trying to be as creative as possible in terms of imagining some of those more interesting interactions.
The idea of, one character having like specialized lines to respond to another, that's a lot of work. Like, that is a lot of writing to do. Is that just, are you doing all of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are some ways in which we've restrained ourselves in the amount of, character relationships and such. But, I mean, it's basically insult comedy.
Right.
Like you mentioned Thorn, the stuff about, like, people telling her that when she's dead they'll sprinkle granola on her grave and that she smells like camping and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's basically like, look at your character and what is the most obvious, just insult you can sling at that character, and then just make the biggest asshole in the game, yell that at them. That's easy mode for this. But then beyond that, it's just like, well, what are those relationships that we would maybe want to expand further? What are those what elements of story that we may or may not be exploring in PvE do we want to be reflected in PvP? And so it's equal parts like, where do we get the most utility for the kind of story that we're trying to tell across both modes, and what is going to be the most fun?
What is it like coming onto like a brand new IP versus coming onto a project that might be an existing franchise?
It's exciting. It's intimidating. It's challenging. It's really rewarding. I tend to be somebody who thrives under particular parameters. Like, if you give me a couple of restrictions and a tool set and tell me to do a thing, and that's way easier than do whatever you want. And so that part kind of terrifies me from time to time. Like, when it gets too blue sky, I'm just like, we could do anything. I have no idea where to start. Obviously, there was a lot of foundation when I arrived, and that was a great place to start. But then when it was just a matter of like, we can explore this character's backstory in how many different ways, and how many different permutations can we do on this particular bent of plot, or I have no idea what to do with that. For at least 5 minutes, then the crying stops. Varnell usually slaps me around a couple times, and I'm okay after that. But it's awesome. It's the first new IP that I've been involved with building in this capacity, and it's a really exciting challenge, and it's delightful to see it come alive. We're making some of the best content that is coming out of this industry. I couldn't be prouder to be here.
It seems like you found a pretty good home for now.
For now.
Yeah.
Until they realize that I'm a fraud and oust me.
Well, keep up that imposter syndrome for now. And
oh yeah, no, you don't even have to tell me.
It'll get you far, actually.
That's just default.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right.